Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome back. Welcome to the Leading Voices from Israel series. I'm Rabbi Goodman. It's good to be with you again. We are in for a bit of a treat today. I want to be very brief and just offer a warm hello and my gratitude to you for joining us here live today, as well as making the time to check this conversation out on the recording subsequently. Today we are having a conversation with Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari from the Rackman Center. And so it's really an exciting piece. And I know we've been talking about this and noting perhaps this is a name that you're not so familiar with. And we're going to suggest this is two names you should really know. They should be household names for you and for your families. So thank you for making the effort to be here. And I'm going to turn it over now to the co-chair of the Israel Engagement Committee, Les Rothschild, to welcome Professor Kaddari.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi, and welcome to all of you, and especially to Professor Kaddari. It is a pleasure to have you and have you here. And I think although we have the bio and a lot of information about the Rackman Center online, and you can go back and look at it, I'm going to take a little bit of time and read it, because I think, this is, for many of us, the first time that we're getting to meet Professor Kaddari, and I think I want to frame it properly so that it really does sink in terms of who we have and who we have speaking to us. So Professor Kaddari is a member of the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University, is a leading expert on international family law and international rights of women, and a feminist critic of civil and Jewish law. From 2007 until 2018, Professor Kaddari served as member and vice president of the United Nations Committee on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. In this capacity, she initiated and led the adoption of General Recommendation 29 on the economic consequences of marriage, family relations, and their dissolution. Professor Halperin-Kaddari is a renowned speaker in academic as well as in professional forums, and has published extensively in her areas of expertise, including family law in Israel, legal pluralism, feminism, halakha, and international women's rights. In 2018, she was named as Apolitical's 100 most influential people in gender policy around the world. Professor Kaddari was personally selected by the late Rabbi Emanuel Rackman to head the Rackman Center for the advancement of the status of women upon its establishment in 2001. She has served in this position since then and has led the center to a number of significant achievements that have impacted the lives of individual Israeli women and family law policy in Israel. You'll hear more about the Rackman Center, I'm sure, from Professor Kaddari. So with no further ado, it's over to you.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to talk about those issues which are really at my core of my own interests and the things that I do, both as a scholar, as an academic, and as an activist, as the founding head of the Rackman Center. So I will share the presentation. Okay. Yeah, it's on the screen, right? Everybody can see it now? Good. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the feminist battle for marriage equality in Israel between Jewish and civil law. And I want to start with a very simple question. When we talk about Israel and we talk about inequality in Israel and feminism in Israel, I'm often faced with this kind of wonder. Wasn't Israel built on gender equality? Isn't it part of the building blocks in everybody's thoughts and beliefs about Israel. We all have in our collective memory, we have these images of the Chalutza and the Chalutz, you know, the pioneers, side by side, men and women, full equality, full gender equality. And to add to this quandary, we have this amazing person, woman, who was the first female prime minister in the world. And we even have her on our 100 shekels bill. And as I said, this is usually the winning claim. We've had Golda. So how come you're talking about gender inequality in Israel, and why are you talking about discrimination against women in Israel? So just to give a sense of things that are more complicated than the myths that we have in the backs of our minds, when I have the opportunity to speak person to person, and when I teach classes, talk to students, I usually ask this question of, since when do women in Israel have the right to vote and to be elected? And I guess that if I had asked it in this audience, the answer would be the same answer that I get everywhere. You know, what kind of question is that? Ever since. I mean, was there any other way? So the answer to that is that women in Israel have had to fight for their suffrage, just like women in the US and women in Canada and women all over the world. The first feminist wave of the 19th century was the suffragist movement, and in Israel, as elsewhere, before the establishment of the State of Israel. So when students look at me and wonder and say, what kind of a question is that? They are right in a sense, because since the State of Israel was officially established in 1948, women have had the right to vote and to be elected to office. But they had to fight for that in the pre-state Yishuv, in pre-state Palestine. And these women that we see on the screen here were some of those suffragist women without whom there could be no Golda Meir. And I give this example also to already connect to what the Rackman Center is doing, because just 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, just before Corona started, we have actually marked the centennial anniversary of the establishment of the founding mothers of the feminist movement in Israel, which is the organization that fought for gender equality and led the battle for women suffragists between 1918 to 1926. And here you can see Rackman Center having this conference at Bar Ilan University to commemorate their battle. So let's fast forward and take a look at the situation of women in Israeli parliament today, or this is not quite today, it's 2 years ago, and the situation today is a bit better, I have to admit. But you can see that, I'm sure you all know, that Israel's parliament consists of 120 members of the parliament, and here we see that women compose around a third, or a little more than a quarter, a little less than a third of the electorate body in Israel. And if we look at international measures, take a quick look at the World Economic Forum, we can see that Israel is not doing well at all. The numbers seem high, 65, 64, but that actually means that we are placed 64 and 65 out of all the countries in the world. So in 2006, we occupied the 35th place. We went down along the years, and we are now in the 60s and 70s, and that shows that we are not doing well at all. So the question then should be, is this not just a part of the general global backlash against women's rights? And I can give a whole separate talk about the backlash against women's rights all over the world, growing backlash since the recession of 2008, getting worse. We see pictures here from Europe, from the US. But that's not the topic of my talk today. The topic of my talk today is the situation in Israel. And in Israel, there is a unique factor. This unique factor is monopoly. And it's not the game that I'm sure all of us like playing with our kids, maybe with our grandchildren. It's the monopoly of these people, this establishment, over the area of family law, of marriage and divorce in Israel. And to be exact, it's the Orthodox monopoly, which is conveniently invisible. We tend to take it for granted. We tend to take it even as a natural facet of Israel, of the state of Israel, as a natural condition for maintaining Israel's characteristic as a Jewish and democratic state. So it's invisible. The exclusivity of religious laws over family law, marriage and divorce, which is really perpetuated throughout law and society, is invisible. And this is really the decisive factor that differentiates between the situation of women in Israel and the situation of women in the other part of the Western world or the northern part of the globe, or whatever way we want to call it. Israel thinks it's Western, but it's not. What we see here is a map, mapping the world according to the degree of equality within family laws over issues of marriage, separation, and divorce. And the more red the country is colored, the less gender equal it is. So we can see that Israel is actually situated where it should be situated, within those countries whose laws are discriminatory against women in the area of family law to various degrees. And so, just to give examples, in 2022 in Israel, no Jewish woman can divorce her husband at will. A woman's right to property upon divorce is very often linked to her fidelity to her husband, to the question, was she faithful or was she not faithful to her husband? Her property rights are conditioned on being faithful. And a woman cannot serve in most positions in the religious family law system because they are women, because of gender. So these are just a few examples of the blatant discrimination against women in Israel 2022 in the area of family law, of marriage and divorce. So how are we to articulate the problem? It's a question of both formal and informal legal discrimination on account of the exclusive jurisdiction of religious laws and religious courts over marriage and divorce. And all these laws, and we focus on Jewish people, on Jewish women, on Jewish men, on rabbinical courts, but we have to remember that this rule of exclusive jurisdiction and the exclusivity of religious laws over marriage and divorce in Israel is the law for all people in Israel, including the 20% of Israeli Arabs, most of whom are Muslim, minority of whom are Christian, and it's the same for Druze, and it's the same for Bedouin. And all of these religious laws, they can compete with each other, which is more patriarchal and which is more discriminatory against women. The patriarchal nature of religious laws discriminates against women of all religions. And to make things worse, this is often accompanied by a biased interpretation and application of civil law. So I have, I think, rightly earned the title of going after rabbinical courts and constantly criticizing decisions of rabbinical judges and criticizing, applying feminist critique over religious laws. But to be fair, my critique is just as strong vis-a-vis the secular courts in Israel and the civil family courts in Israel, who very often are being blinded by notions of formal equality and applying these notions of formal equality when the whole infrastructure is completely discriminatory, is completely unequal. And that really makes things much, much worse. So let us go into the little bit more details of where things are really bad, where things are really unequal, and what can be done about it. So I don't know if maybe some of you have had the privilege of watching this incredible film, Get, the Trial of Vivian Amsalem, the wonderful, wonderful actress Ronit El-Kabetz, who had unfortunately since passed away, which really depicts the crux of the problem. This is a scene from the movie where you see the woman in front, alone in the room of the rabbinical court, fighting for her freedom, to be released from the husband who refuses to grant her the get. And she's being judged, like all women, being judged by panels of only male dayanim, male judges in the rabbinical court, who apply the Jewish law, which, as you can see here very clearly, gives total control over the get, over the bill of divorce, to the men, where the woman's need for the divorce is much, much greater. And why is it so? Without the free will of the man to release the woman, she is considered still a married woman. And a married woman under Jewish law is prohibited from having any relationships, any intimate relationships, with another man who is not her husband, to whom she's not married. And if she does conduct such relationships, it is the most illicit, abhorrent sin under Jewish law. And if there are children resulting from these illicit relationships, they are mamzerim, they are bastards, and they are not allowed to marry within the Jewish community. And this is a terrible punishment to be inflicted upon your children, not even upon you. And you as a mother, we have dozens of women clients in our legal aid clinic in the Rackman Center who are not religious, who are not observant, who are completely secular. But when they know that if they will give up the get, if they just say, I don't care about the get, I'm going to go on with my life, I can have relationship with another man, I can start a new page, and I can have children, knowing that these children will be bastards who will not be allowed to marry in Israel is such a threat on them, and most are not willing to take this this load, this burden upon themselves and upon their children, and so they are being extorted. So this is the result, the extortion that goes on in the rabbinical courts on a daily basis. And just to make clear, there is no equivalent on the male side. If a man who is still married has relationship with another woman and has children with another woman, nothing is wrong there. These children are okay, and they can marry, and there is no stain, there are no bastards. It's only for women. Only women are being punished that way. So the state gives the control over the area of marriage and divorce to the religion, and the religion gives the control over the freedom of the wife, over her right to exit, to the husband. And this combination works to a reality of ongoing extortion in the rabbinical courts. And here I will try to go through it very quickly, but so I will not stop on every slide with the data, but I do want to show you that one of the things that we've been doing in the Rackman Center, we are an academic and an activist center. So as academics, we also conduct research. We also conduct empirical research. And one of the things that we did is to conduct a survey among Jewish women who have been through divorce processes in Israel. We repeated this survey twice in 2013 and 2017 to find out the scope of the get abuse. What we call get abuse is this extortion where women are being demanded to give up a range of their rights in return for the get, in return for the divorce. And we found that overall, more than a third of the women who divorced, they said that their spouses, their ex-spouses, threatened or explicitly refused to give them the get, the divorce. So you can see the numbers here, 35%. Let me see if I can highlight. Just trying to see. No, this is not the highlight. Yeah, okay. So 35% in 2013, 37% in 2017. And what is more concerning is that the more religious the woman is, the more prone she is to be extorted, to be in this situation of being refused their get, their divorce. So here is the religious ultra-Orthodox, it's 44%, the traditional, it's 45%, and the non-religious is less than that. Even more alarming is the fact, where is it? Is that women who have been victims, survivors of domestic violence, were more than twice as likely to be subjected to get abuse. This is really alarming. The numbers here is that more than 60% of them, those women who have also suffered from domestic violence, were victims of get abuse, were agunot, were women who are refused their gitin. And women who have had kids under 18 and were victims of domestic abuse were in the worst situation. 72% of them have reported being subject to this form of violence, to this form of get abuse. So what is to be done? So here I'm getting to the part to talk a little bit about the Rackman Center and what we're trying to do in return to what I described here. And I always want to start with this quote of our dear, the late Rabbi Rackman, who said, "Justice, I feel, is the essence and heart of Judaism. I fought and still am fighting for what I regard as the dignity and integrity of the halachic system, which too many Jews and rabbis are abusing. It is there that women become the sufferers because men alone determine Jewish law." And that's what we are trying to change. Change is our key notion, and realizing that this is a compounded problem, it requires compounded action. So we see law as a tool for social change. We are a legal center situated in academia, and in all these circles, you can see what I like to call the Rackman Model. The Rackman Model says that we are doing things at the same time. We are both engaging in working within the religious institutions and outside the religious institutions. It's a dual track model in everything that we do. The problem lies within religion, so the solution will come from religion, but it will also come from outside religion. So we are cooperating with organizations who are working to promote religious pluralism in Israel, or marriage pluralism in Israel, to introduce civil marriages in Israel, but at the same time, in the legal aid clinic where we represent women pro bono, we are working within the institution, within rabbinical courts, in providing novel solutions, novel interpretations of the Jewish law. We're working with the government and as independent agents. So we are engaging in lobbying, in promoting bills and new laws. One of the things that we are engaged in right now, and this is the combination of academia and political activism, which is really a very unique synergy between academia. You know, we are not sitting in the ivory tower. We are acting as almost a grassroots organization. So one of the things that we are very much heavily engaged in right now, actually took me out of being interviewed and working all day on the very last stages of having Israel to ratify an international convention, which is called the Istanbul Convention, the Council of Europe Convention on combating violence against women and domestic violence. So this is something that we have been promoting in our branch of political activism, of lobbying. We've been promoting it for 6 years, and now we are in the very last stages of the battle because there are those who object to that. But it's a good example of tying together our academic expertise with our political engagement, and we are also involved in both international arenas and domestic, of course, the domestic arena. Just to give you very, very briefly numbers, pro bono legal representation for 40 women each year. Our helpline next to the legal aid clinic, in which we give the pro bono representation. Our helpline takes more than 600 calls each year who receive like the first advice, the first aid on their legal situation. I've already mentioned the advocacy and legislation where we promote policy that protects women in family law, including new bills, new legislative initiatives to pass in the Israeli parliament. We provide emotional support to women through groups of through support groups of other women who have gone through divorce, who aid the women who need this emotional support. This is where our advantage as being part of an academic institution is really reflected, because we collaborate with the psychology department, with the School of Social Welfare, Social Welfare, with other academic institutes out of Bar-Ilan University. And we also act as an ordinary academic center where we conduct conferences and publish research and position papers. So I already mentioned 40 women each year. We usually have a rate of 100%, almost 100% success rate in freeing women from their from being agunot, securing women's economic rights. I mentioned already at the beginning that there is this notion of faithfulness, fidelity to the husband. So we've initiated and we managed to convince the High Court of Justice to conduct a rehearing and change a previous judgment of a rabbinical court, which took away women's property rights on account of her alleged unfaithfulness to her husband. And we managed to convince the High Court of Justice to change this ruling. The Istanbul Convention, I just mentioned, this is what we are currently being engaged in, a very, very fierce political battle on this issue as we speak. We've initiated the change in the task force committees during Corona, during COVID, where the political stage was really had almost no women in the various government committees. Again, we appealed to the High Court of Justice to force the government to include women in these task forces. I think I'm running out of time, so I just want to end up with giving you these links to our website. You can see our key projects here, and I'll be very happy to send you further materials if you are interested in perhaps partnering with us. So these are the links to the center, to our Facebook. We have a YouTube channel, and you are welcome to email us, and we'll be really very, very happy to share more materials and explain more. And I'll be very happy to take questions now, and really thank you for the attention and for giving us this opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Professor Kaddari. Very important conversation. And like I said, so many of us are so unaware, don't think about these topics. And so we're thankful for you and for the center for the sacred work that you're doing. I'm going to invite everyone again, if you have questions for Professor Kaddari, to please write them in the chat box. One was sent directly to me, and so I'll ask on someone's behalf, and again, encourage others to write questions in as well. This question comes: can a prenuptial agreement force a man to give his wife a get if the marriage dissolves? And then there's more questions to follow.
Yeah, okay. It's an excellent question. And prenups are really an area which we are also involved in, and we are promoting the signing of prenups, but we have to be very honest about it. It's not a foolproof solution. It depends on the nature of the prenup, and we also have to differentiate between those who are being offered in Northern America and those who are being offered in Israel. There are these forms of prenups who, legally speaking, make use of halachic tools to actually preclude the necessity of the cooperation of the husbands, of the husband. So they really managed to go around the need of the husband issuing the get. So these prenups are those that include in them what we call a condition, like a conditional get, which if the husband refuses to grant the get, then some other can actually initiate this coming into effect of this preconditioned get. I apologize for not being 100% clear here. I'm a little at loss for the legal terms in English, legal terms in contract law in English here, but I hope I managed to make myself clear. Anyway, the thing is that even though these tools exist within halacha, and there are precedents for making use of these tools, such as the conditional get, the rabbinical courts in Israel refuse to make use of these tools, and they will not, first of all, they will not marry a couple who comes with this kind of a prenup agreement. And if somehow there is a couple who were halachically married and have entered into this agreement, they will not enforce it. It's a different situation in Northern America. However, there are other prenup agreements that can be efficient in serving as a deterrent against withholding of the get. Those prenups whom we call Heskem Lechavod Adadi, meaning the agreement for mutual respect between the husband and the wife. The basic tool there is that if a spouse, it could be either the husband or the wife, even though, as I explained, the husband is in much less need of the get than the wife, but there can still be situations of a wife refusing to cooperate in the divorce. So if either of the spouses refuses, then there is a kind of financial penalty that enters. So let's take the typical example. If the husband refuses to grant a get, he will pay every week $1,000, 4,000 shekels, or every month 60% of his salary will be taken as kind of a penalty. We figure that within 2 or 3 months he will have no choice but to grant the get. But that's really not foolproof, because there are those who are the most abusive men who will continue in their refusal and in not granting their wives the get, and that's why I said that it's not a foolproof solution. But it's really important because it also serves as awareness raising tool. So the message that we try to provide is that it's really very important, even more important for parents of young couples, and more so for parents of young women who are about to get married, to suggest the signature, to suggest signing a prenup. And if there is resistance on the part of the husband-to-be, that's a kind of a warning. It's a kind of a red light. You should discuss it. You should look into it. It could be an indication of maybe not such a promising relationship. So the educational power in these prenups is probably even stronger than their actual usage.
Thank you. It's very, very clear. I couldn't help you much with the Hebrew there. There's a follow-up to that question from the same asker that says, with this context, knowing the situation, is there a large or a significant population of women in Israel that therefore decide not to get married? And if so, what is the status under common law, and what is the status of their children?
Well, that's actually a subject in which I'm also engaged in my scholarly hat. As an academic, I got a grant from the Israel Science Foundation to conduct a research on the growing phenomena of non-state marriages in Israel, of people who are not just living together without marriage, but who do conduct a wedding ceremony, but not under the auspice of the formal rabbinate. But the main issue here, as an answer to this very good question, is that the law about couples who live together in Israel without marriage is really unique. The recognition of, like the whole package of rights, obligations, benefits for couples who live together but are not formally married is much wider than in any other jurisdiction. It's wider than in Canada. It's definitely wider than in the US or in the UK. So couples who live together, we call them de facto couples, could actually be in almost the same position as a formally married couple. The only difference is that they are not registered as married, and that means that if they split up, there is no question of get. There is no question of needing to obtain the divorce. And it might seem paradoxical, right? Because I'm describing a very patriarchal system. I'm describing a very traditional, religious, very non-enabling, non-pluralistic system. But that's the formal legal system. And because this formal legal system is so prohibitive and so discriminatory and non-pluralistic, non-enabling, what we have is the secular legal system, both courts and legislator, who have been providing solutions for those who want to get away from the prohibitory religious system. Because what I also didn't mention is that on account of religious law, I only talked about the discrimination against women, the gender discrimination, but there are lots of other human rights violations on account of the exclusivity of religious laws over marriage and divorce in Israel. There are those who are prohibited from marrying, right? Kohanim, who cannot marry divorcees, or all those whose Jewish affiliation is being doubted by the rabbinical establishment. This is very relevant to the Jewish world outside of Israel, because I'm sure you know it, probably much better than I do, is that many of the conversions by communities out of Israel are not recognized, are not valid in the rabbinical courts in Israel. And so these Jews are prohibited from marrying under the rabbinate in Israel. So the legal system has had to provide solutions. But paradoxically speaking, because of these solutions, because they exist, then the exclusivity of religious laws can still be maintained. So we are in kind of, catch-22 here. But, this is the long answer to the short question.
It's a great answer. And we in the progressive Jewish world know this very, very well. Luckily, in the recent years, we've had non-Orthodox conversion recognized from outside, right? Outside of the state of Israel. But, if a congregant wanted to fly me to Israel to officiate their wedding, it's not possible.
Right.
It's not something we can do. So we've got one more question here based on family life and children and marriage, and then we'll maybe shift to a different topic. This question comes from Sharon. She writes, has a collective action suit ever, has a class action, right? Has a class action lawsuit ever been taken on behalf of the mamzerim and their own families against this ongoing discrimination they are born into through no fault of their own, limiting their citizenship rights to marriage?
Yeah, it's a great question. The simple answer to that is no, because this is Israel does not have a constitution, a written constitution, but it does have constitutional law. And this is the constitutional infrastructure of the system in Israel. And it's not an invention of the state of Israel. It is the legacy that has been maintained from the times of the Ottoman Empire, from 1519 to 1919, and has been maintained by the British Mandate over pre-state Palestine, and taken over by the state of Israel when it was established. It was called the Millet system, meaning that every religious community has had its own autonomy to regulate its own internal affairs of personal status law, meaning family law. And Jewish law, this is the Jewish law. This is the Orthodox interpretation of the Jewish law, of the halacha. And even though we have, since 1992, we have basic laws, which are like kind of a mini constitution in Israel, and there is the basic law of human freedom and what's it called, and dignity. And you can very well argue that being a mamzer is, of course, a violation of the very basic human right, and it's a violation of a person's dignity, and of course it's a violation of equality. Even these laws have maintained the existing constitutional infrastructure when it comes to the laws of marriage and divorce. So legally speaking, there is no way to bring a case on this account. What we can do is is to act politically, is to try and convince the various political parties to change the constitutional framework here, the legal framework. But I'm not optimistic here, and my thesis is that it is in fact in the interest of most parties in Israel, including the non-religious parties, to maintain this status quo, to maintain this state of affairs. And it's related very, very strongly to the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because as long as the conflict goes on, it is in the interest of the two conflicting nations to maintain the fences and not to allow intermarriage. So it's all Jewish parties, and also the Arab parties, who would actually prefer not to allow mixed religious marriages in Israel. But if you enact a civil law of marriage, of course you cannot say that a Jew can marry only a Jew, and a Muslim can only marry a Muslim, and a Christian can only marry a Christian. There is no way to do it in a civil law. So it's really very convenient for the two sides of the conflict to have the religious laws do this work for them and maintain this total separation between the two conflicting nations. I know this sounds radical. I'm not the only one who is arguing it. I'll be happy to send you my article about that. But I'm really convinced that this is at least part of the reason, at the heart of the matter. And as I said, I'm pessimistic on this, the possibility of changing the law here.
I want to clarify. You don't think that's positive. You think that it just works towards a not great status quo, correct? I don't want to.
No, of course I'm not for maintaining this status quo. I'm just explaining why I don't see the prospect of change anytime soon.
That's what I was like. There's no way. That's what I heard. Okay, that's I imagine. So, yeah, that's fascinating, Professor. I've never thought of that before, and I think that makes perfect sense. Unfortunately. One more question. I think maybe we'll have time for one or two more, but maybe we'll move from that kind of pessimistic place to a more optimistic one. Can you point to signs of progress that the Rackman Center has achieved?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned a few. We've had some legislative successes. We were the ones who were at the forefront of changing the legal age of marriage in Israel and raising it from 17 to 18. We were the ones who were at the forefront of changing the law to allow for division of the marital property, regardless of whether the couple has already divorced or not. So until the law was changed, the woman who was caught in unwanted marriage was also caught without any property rights, because marital property distribution was conditioned on the actual divorce of the couples. So, I mean, this was really a Gordian knot, and we managed to break it. Successes that we've had on the judicial front is in the area of what we call the fight against women's exclusion in Israel. I don't know if you are aware of that, but you probably, I know that Rabbi Anat Hoffman was here, the previous speaker, so I'm sure that she mentioned it, the growing phenomena of separation between men and women in public spaces in Israel, women's exclusion in Israel. And what we focus on is, as I said, not just on family law, but also on the overlap between religion, state, and how it affects women's rights in Israel. So we deal with exclusion of women from the religious sphere, from public spaces which are under the religious sphere, such as within the rabbinical courts. And right now, there is no possibility of having women judges in rabbinical courts, but we manage to open up the way to have women as legal advisors to judges in rabbinical courts. Until we started this legal battle, it was actually very interestingly in the labor court. Until we started that, there were absolutely no women at all. Not as judges, not as legal advisors, as clerks for judges, no woman in the rabbinical court. So we opened this up. Right now we are involved in an appeal to the High Court of Justice, which is to be heard actually very soon, I think in the coming months, to allow women to officiate marriages, to serve as marriage officiates under the formal rabbinate. So as I mentioned, there is a growing phenomena of couples who seek weddings outside the rabbinate, and there, of course, you can have women officiate and act as officiates. You have women rabbis, even within Orthodoxy, but not recognized as such by the formal rabbinate. But what we aim, and this is the very unique strategy of the Rackman Center, is davka within the religious establishment, within the state formal rabbinate, to force them to open up for women. So this is the change from within. We utilize the state mechanisms to promote the change from within. And I mentioned that groundbreaking precedent about overturning the previous holding that took away women's property rights because of her alleged unfaithfulness to her husband. And I can continue and give you a number of other precedents that we gained, but we really do have quite a lot of legal and case law successes, and hopefully we will also be able to report to you that we managed to convince the government to indeed ratify the Istanbul Convention. We think it is a major step that we really hope we will manage to bring it to success.
Thank you. Last question I think we're going to have time for, and I think I hit all of, I don't want to ask my question if there's anything left in the chat, so just give me a quick second as I scroll. Okay, good. So I'm wondering how we Canadian Jews, I'm actually an American, but I'll speak on behalf of our congregation, how can the progressive Jewish community living outside of Israel support the good work of the Rackman Center? How can we be your advocates and your allies, and how can we support you?
Thank you very much for this question. I think you can imagine that we rely heavily on the partnership and support, both financial and moral, from communities. Oh, so cute. Not as cute as my granddaughter, but almost. So we really rely, we depend on funds coming from Jewish federations and coming from other organizations as well. But the Jewish world, and we are extremely grateful for that, is really becoming more and more involved in matters that had previously been probably viewed as internal to the state of Israel. But I think that our talk here today and your questions really show that we are all tied together. And whatever happens in Israel in this area of religious law, of marriage and divorce, of Jewish affiliation, of women's rights, gender equality, is really part of that relates and that is relevant to the Jewish world at large. So we'll be very happy to to invite you to come on our website, visit us at our website, and of course visit us physically if ever you get to Bar Ilan University, and if there are possibilities of also partnering financially, we'll be very happy to pursue this. Send you materials about that. We'll be grateful for that. Thank you.
Professor Kaddari, I want to say on behalf of the Holy Blossom community and everyone and all of our guests joining us, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for this sacred work that you do on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of the women of Israel, and really Israeli society. We know that it's not just the women, but you're working towards a better society. And so we are grateful for you, and grateful for the work that you're doing, and really for taking the time to be with us this evening for you, this afternoon for us. So wanted to end with gratitude and a word to everyone to please join us this Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. at Holy Blossom. There's both online and in person a Yom HaZikaron ceremony starting at 6 that goes right into our Yom HaTzmaut celebration with talking about the Israeli Air Force. So again, all that information can be found on online at the Holy Blossoms website. So I hope you'll join us. Professor, thank you so much. The last word is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more in stressing that whatever we do, everything that we do is not just for the sake of women. It's really in following the footsteps of the late Rabbi Rackman. It's our way of doing tikkun olam, making the world a better place for everybody.
Thank you so much. Okay. We won't say goodbye. We'll say Lechit Ra'ot. We'll see you again soon. Okay. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.